Greetings, everyone. I am Pastor Lydia, and I will be doing Inside the Text today. And today we're diving into the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, continuing to the end of our church year. We've got just 2 more Sundays left before we begin Advent and start the church year all over. So we just have a couple more readings here from the Gospel of Luke before we transition to a year-long journey through the Gospel of Matthew. Before we dive in, I just want to invite you to ground yourself, to center yourself, to take a breath, to light a candle, to remind yourself of God's presence in this moment, and to be open to what the Spirit is stirring in your body, in your spirit, and be open to what rises. Pay attention to what rises. Sometimes we are able to connect the dots and think through what we're feeling right away in the moment. And sometimes we have to pay attention to our bodies and what we're feeling in our bodies, because often our physical body will tell us or communicate with us in certain ways that we may not even notice or be able to put words to right away. And so I just invite you to be open to all of that experience, knowing that God is present in all of it and works through all of it. And so openness is so important, especially in our world right now, being open to that stirring of the Spirit and of God's presence. So I invite you to take a breath, focus, center, ground yourself as we dive in. As I mentioned, our reading is from the Gospel of Luke, and it comes from chapter 21, verses 5 through 19. Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verses 5 through 19. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for those things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your souls." Here ends the reading. Feels like a lot. And we have a tendency as people, generally speaking, to want to focus on the end times and interpreting when exactly and how exactly the end of time will be, and the signs that Jesus speaks of, the kingdom against kingdom and nation against nation, and the great signs from heaven and the suffering and all of that. We have a tendency to focus on and predict that. But what I actually want to really focus on today and inside the text is less about the theological perspective of this revelation from Jesus. It's his last sermon before he's arrested. So this is very close to the end of his ministry in the Gospel of Luke. And talk more about some of the history and how that plays into what we should and how we should interpret it for us today, as well as when we think about it, the original audience of the Gospel of Luke. A couple of things that are really important to remember. First is that the Gospel of Luke was originally an oral tradition. It was spoken word of mouth in the community of the hearers of Luke for a long time. And when it was first written down on paper of any kind, was after the destruction of Jerusalem in about 70 CE, Common Era. And so the temple that Jesus is talking about has already been destroyed. And the audience of the first audience of Luke would have known this. And some of them may have lived through that horrible time. And many of them also are living in a time when Christians did face persecution and suffering and even martyrdom in a way that, while that still does happen today, persecution, many of us here in the United States have never and will never experience that level of persecution. Those are really important things to remember, because it can help us understand why the author of Luke felt it really important for Jesus to say these things, specifically have them written down this way. The temple was already destroyed, so why is the author of Luke having Jesus predict that destruction? Why is the author of Luke having Jesus talk about persecution and suffering and brother and father turning against them and that betrayal and the great signs and portents from heaven? About nations rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Some of it is these things will happen. This is the way of the world. And is not the end yet. It is not the end yet. Early Christians, the first people within the church, before it was even considered a church, many inhabited the belief and embodied the belief that Jesus would return within their lifetimes, that second coming would happen within their lifetimes. We don't really operate that way theologically anymore. We still wait in anticipation, but we don't live in that immediate understanding that Christ will come again. And so we need to understand, I think, the importance of this being written for the audience, the original audience of the Gospel of Luke, because of the suffering that they had lived and also were currently enduring. This message from Jesus is just as much as it is for us about hope and enduring and trusting God's presence in the midst of really awful things in the world. It was also that for that first audience. It was meant as comfort. These things will happen. I am with you in these things. I will give you the knowledge and the words to say that your enemies cannot stand against or argue against. I am with you. So many of us may not often think about deeply the historical reality of what happened to the Jews and these people who in the early church still consider themselves to be Jewish, just a different understanding of Judaism. Christianity hadn't really been named Christianity when the Gospel of Luke was written. It wasn't just a destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that happened when Rome came in and destroyed things in 69 70 CE. It was a siege. Jerusalem was under siege from about April to September. So April, May, June, July, August, September. So almost a half of a year. And if any of you are familiar with siege warfare, it is horrible. Typically what happens is, whether it's a castle or a city, residents, people within the castle or the city, hunker down and they bunker in, they build themselves in and prepare to not be able to leave to access resources, water, food, anything that they might need, that they would have to leave the safety of wherever they have bunkered into. And they wait. They wait it out. And sometimes militant groups will sneak out and try to sabotage, or they try to destroy siege towers. Often towers with ladders or battering rams were used in this type of warfare. In Roman times, they wouldn't have had things like a catapult or a trebuchet. Those are more medieval inventions. But Romans did use battering rams to break down walls and doors and bulldoze their way into fortresses and barricades and cities. And so for months, this is happening, and the Roman military breaks through the first wall and the second wall and the third wall. And throughout all of this, the people who have decided to try to endure are suffering from malnutrition and disease and sanitary, like super unsanitary conditions, plus physical violence of warfare. And slowly, over these 6 months, Jerusalem is destroyed, leveled. Historians at the time that were chronicling this siege write that the destruction of the temple was a casualty, a byproduct of war, and not intention. Modern scholars believe that it was very, very intentional, that the Roman soldiers went in and leveled the temple to the best of their ability, because it represented such a strong opposition to the theology of Roman pantheon, Roman gods and goddesses, in this temple versus Jewish understanding of divinity. And so, knowing a little bit more of that history and how horrendously awful, think of Gaza today. Horrendously awful. It was. The first audience of Luke would have been survivors of that, as well as descendants of those survivors. Awful. And so, to have Jesus say, this temple will be destroyed, not a stone will be left. Persecution will happen. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And I will be with you in that. I will give you the words, the defense that none can stand against. Gives people who are experiencing pretty unimaginable horror comfort. And what we do with that today now is, how do we turn these words into hope and comfort and support for ourselves in the midst of destruction and despair? And how do we turn it into words of comfort and hope and life for others who are also experiencing and suffering and having to endure horrendous things? And a final note, a little theological tidbit here. How do we remind ourselves that no matter how much money we pour into something, matter how grand and beautiful a building is, it's temporary. It will not last. But what does last? I want you to ponder that question. What does last beyond the grand buildings, beyond the simple buildings? What lasts beyond that? And maybe we'll explore a little bit more of that theologically in the sermon coming this Sunday. I hope you can join us in person or online, and that you have a blessed day and week.